great talking to you guys. It's great lecturing here. In fact, this is my very room where I do lectures. They sometimes assign me a room here on campus, and thankfully the people at Hillel, who I really do appreciate, let me conduct the lectures in this beautiful room with this great audio vis, as you can see. So I'm really privileged to be able to continue lectures and lecturing to you guys in this room as well. Actually, I really do appreciate that really lovely introduction. Thanks so much. And yeah, in fact, this particular, what we're looking at today with the Holy See, the Vatican, and its different agreements with the Palestinians and with the Israelis as well, well, right now, at least the Middle East Quarterly will have some part of an article in the Middle East Quarterly over the next couple months, I guess, and some other, I guess, highfalutin law journal type stuff, which hopefully you guys are not reading. We'll also publish something about it, but be more legal, you know, with thousands of footnotes and all this different stuff. But having said that, let's take a look and break down some of the activities that have been happening in the Middle East, particularly in the Holy Land, obviously, and the Holy See's activities therein. And that's kind of why I titled it Thoughts and Queries, because what I'd like to do is kind of walk through the various, what I call fundamental agreements, or kind of like treaties, between the Holy See as the international actor, if you will, of the Vatican, and the various parties, and let's call them state political parties, that are at work in the Holy Land currently, which of course is Israel and the Palestinian Authority. The reason why I chose this topic was because it's for May 2015 was the most recent agreement signed between the Holy See and the Palestinian Authority, and it was only released, oddly enough, only released to the public in October, November of 2015. It took kind of a while. I could talk a little bit about the politics behind that, but it's not really so relevant to the agreement itself. But what I really would like to do is amplify the role of the Holy See with regard to where it stands in the international relations context, meaning what is its purpose? What does it see as its purpose? And then kind of walk through the agreements that the Holy See has made with the Palestinians and contrast that with the agreements that it has made with Israel, particularly in 1993 as the key fundamental agreement with Israel, and then 1997 was a legal personality agreement. Well, having said that, let's take a look a little bit about what the Holy See is all about. I call it IR, forgive me for my acronyms. It's, I think it's a really terrible leftover that I have from working with a bunch of different organizations in the human rights field where they like to sort of turn everything into OSF and IR and this, that, and the other. So forgive me if I throw in these acronyms. I will tell you what they say, but of course you can interrupt me and ask me questions in the middle as well, at least with regard to the acronyms, and we'll get to the Q&A at the end too. So Holy See and International Relations, this is Article 24 of the Treaty of Conciliation. Basically, the Holy See, from 1870 till about 1929, actually the Vatican really didn't have an official place, which I know sounds really weird because of course they have the Basilica and St. Peter's and all these different places in Rome, but it didn't have an official position, a legal position. And it was in 1929 when they made what's called the Treaty of Conciliation, which is kind of a series of three different treaties that was made between the Holy See, or the Vatican, and the Holy See acting in the Holy See's stead, in the Vatican's stead, sorry, the Holy See acting as the Vatican's representative, with the Italian state. And that was to actually create the status, a court status to the Holy See and to the Vatican itself. And that's kind of how we know it today as the Vatican. Oh yeah, you go to the Vatican, it's about 1 mile square, you know, maybe 1.6 kilometers. And it's you know, kind of its own sovereign, kind of has its own stamps, you know, and has its own guards and all these different things that you hear about as the Holy See as the Vatican, as this kind of like state within a state. And this treaty is kind of what created that. And it's important because it sort of gives us insight into what are the, if you will, capacities, but also the limitations that the Holy See took upon itself when signing this treaty, particularly with regard to international relations. So here it says, in regard to the sovereignty pertaining to it, also in international matters, it meaning the Vatican, the Holy See declares that it shall take no part in temporal rivalries between states, except, of course, if it's for the Pacific mission, meaning for peace, or somebody's asked them to, you know, or it's acting within its moral and spiritual power. But the key thing here is that you can see the Holy See and the Vatican is limiting itself and its international relations capacities to not involving itself in temporal rivalries. And that's rather important for this context, particularly in the Holy Land, and particularly when engaging any issue that involves Israelis and the Palestinians. Because right away you're going to get into some type of temporal rivalry. And it could be over a declaration of where land is. It could be over, as we'll see here, with regard to recognition, which is an extremely important issue. Or it could be with regard to with the actual peace process itself. Now, I have to stress, it's not to say that the Holy See will not involve itself in peace negotiations. Of course it will, and it has. But the key reason why, or the basis why the Holy See might involve itself in negotiations of peace is because it sees itself as a neutral party, and it holds itself out as a neutral party. So it's right away important to recognize that this treaty put on the obligation on the Holy See to not involve itself in temporal rivalries. And I just wanted to show by contrast, this is the Holy See-Israel Agreement, fundamental agreement from 1993 that I was talking about before. Article 11.2, the Holy See, taking its case to its right to exercise moral and spiritual, similar to the moral and spiritual power. It recalls that, owing to its own character, meaning the Treaty of Conciliation, it's committed to remaining a stranger to all merely temporal conflicts, and I'll talk about this language in a second, but notice how it's kind of mirroring Article 24 from the Treaty of Conciliation, that it will remain a stranger, to all temporal conflicts, to all conflicts that are going to be of time orientation. And that's really important to take into account because one might question whether the May 2015 agreement that the Holy See entered into with the Palestinian Authority, whether that violates these type of articles. That's something that we'll hopefully amplify when we talk more. I want you to notice that the language here in Article 11.2 of the Holy See Agreement from 1993, which principle applies, of course the Israelis insisted upon this, principle applies specifically to disputed territories and unsettled borders. And I guess you all know, hopefully know what they're talking about here. But I want you to note the language here. It's not occupied territories. Disputed territories is the language of the Foreign Ministry of Israel. This is probably the only treaty I've ever seen that actually uses that term, that language, the Israeli mandated language. Yeah, it is kind of interesting because it demonstrates that there was something going on here. Well, actually, what it really does demonstrate is that the Holy See is a stranger to temporal conflicts. It's almost like they didn't care that much. Not that they didn't care in the sense of course, they care about peace, and of course, they care about human rights, and of course, they care about protecting Christians, et cetera, et cetera. That goes without saying. That's part of the job, if you will, of the Holy See, as we'll see in the next slide. But what it does say, it does indicate to us an understanding that the Holy See doesn't really take into account, and if it does, it's not central to their notion of temporal issues like recognition, temporal issues like necessarily border conflicts as such. So anyway, I wanted you to be aware of that. This is, of course, from 1983, and the language will subsequently change when we get into the Palestinian Authority's agreement from May 2015. But again, just be aware of that, the unsettled borders issues, that basically what Israel is saying to the Holy See is make sure that you're not going to get involved in what's going on here. And if you do, then we expect you to be a neutral party and assist. So, international relations of the Holy See in general are kind of a two-part process. One is can be called hierarchical or monarchical-oriented approach. It's kind of a centralized authority, the Pope, obviously, as a centralized authority, centralized figure for the Vatican. And it's important to recognize that the Pope certainly does have authority in the world. Statements made by the Pope are amplified and reported worldwide. If the Pope beautifies an individual, it's going to make the press. And certainly if the Pope comes out and makes statements about homosexuality or makes statements about other aspects of religion that impact upon society like abortion, of course it's going to have an impact. It's not to say, and this is important to recognize, that the Pope is like a king. The Pope is obviously not like a king. There's actually quite a strong hierarchy in the Vatican itself. But what the Pope says can and does have major significance and ripple effects around the world. So on the one hand, the Pope can have a major influence on international relations. He can cause good and bad to Christians around the world as well based on what he says. He has to be quite careful. But that is an arm, that is an important arm of international relations aspect with regard to the Holy See's international capacities. The other is what I call more of a pluralist approach, and that's where you see the Holy See acting kind of like shades of statehood, relations with states links. You're typical. Here, let's sign this agreement and allow for freedom between us. We'll see a typical agreement that we have today with May 2015 agreement with the Palestinian Authority. But any type of agreement that might occur between states. Let's allow for diplomatic relations. Let's have some type of consulate. I'm not going to talk about free trade because obviously for the Holy See that's not the issue. It's more other types of issues like freedom of religion and protecting the Christian laity. But it's the notion of, in the pluralist approach, where the Holy See is acting as a state, quote unquote, or like a state entity, to give it really the proper answer. What's important in the pluralist approach and the Holy See is the historical connections and protection of Catholic communities, and that is a major focus of the Holy See's international relations. And that is a focus on protecting the Catholic communities. Theological commitments, and that's, of course, extremely broad terms, but it's kind of like, what we would, in the Jewish sense, like tikkun olam or stuff like that. Acting for proper purpose, humanity, humane grounds, things like that. Protecting people, not engaging in illicit warfare, crazy stuff like that happens, unfortunately, around the world. Broad and worldwide representation, meaning that in the pluralist approach, the Holy See does not see itself as acting for its little enclave of the Vatican in Rome, but it actually sees itself as operating for the entire worldwide Catholic community, which gives it a lot of not just gravitas, but it gives it a lot of strength. You're talking about over 1 billion people that it's claiming to represent. It's not to usurp the states in which these individuals are nationals, but it is to say is that their interests that exist in the world, they will go ahead and attempt to, afford protection or engage in agreements with the other states in order to allow for protection for Christians, Catholics around Catholic communities around the world. So they don't see themselves again as representing, yes, the Vatican, but the interests in whom they're representing a worldwide representation. And that's why temporal conflicts, that's why borders don't enter into the fray for them. It's not an issue for the Holy See. Finally, I have down neutrality above national conflicts, i.e. the Holy See acting in a neutral sense. And that's really quite important to the Holy See because they want to preserve that form of neutrality. They want to preserve that capacity to engage and assist in different conflicts that might occur around the world. So, for example, the famous Beagle Channel case, you'll have the Holy See acting as an arbiter. By the same token, when you have, they will come out and say and act against the states. Why aren't you protecting this particular Catholic community? Copts in Egypt, for example, about 10 years ago when they were being persecuted. So the Holy See would come out and rail against Egypt. What am I saying? 5 years ago, not 10 years ago. I give an example here of the Vatican and Nazi Germany just because it's such an interesting type of history if you really think about it. I don't know if you're aware, but believe it or not, the Holy See actually signed the Concordat with Nazi Germany, with the Third Reich. And that came from the notion of that they have to act to protect the Christian flock and reflect their desires. When I say their desires, meaning of the local Christian community, Catholic community, excuse me. And what happened there was, in a nutshell, not meaning to take too much from this particular lecture, but just in a very brief nutshell, initially, depending on who you want to read and how you want to interpret it, but I'll just give a very distilled view, and we could argue about all these different occurrences as they happen. But basically, initially, the Pope was actually obviously against what Nazi Germany was trying to do, what the Third Reich was trying to do. But the reaction by the Third Reich was to put the squeeze on the local Catholic community, and they started persecuting them. And then you had the bishop in Germany going to the Pope and saying, hey, we really need help here. And it's kind of an odd argument, but he says, hey, we were abiding by the laws that are of the Third Reich, so we're adhering to local laws, and we don't want to be persecuted for that. So please, could you please allow for some type of protection for us? And as a result, they signed the Concordat. Again, whether it's morally good or morally bad, the perception of the Holy See at the time was that we'll sign the Concordat, and then they issued kind of these general statements about, you should still adhere to protection, treat people humanely and not engage in persecution and stuff like that. But kind of a silent type of shout, if you will, coming from the Vatican in that sense. But it's just, the reason why I'm mentioning it is because it does reflect their approach to international relations, which is protection of Catholic communities and this worldwide representation to protect them. I have here, the next slide is it different for the Holy Land? And this is something I want to think about with you guys today as we walk through the different agreements, and that is, does the international relations of the Holy See alter or shift when approaching the Holy Land? And for obvious reasons, because there are important sites there, holy sites. It's where Christianity was founded. This is an important place. And maybe that will cause a shift in international relations, and I think it kind of does. Well, pre-state Israel, meaning pre-1948 at the very least, actually interesting, if you look at what happened there, the Holy See, in particular, the Vatican was very fearful of Jewish presence in the Holy Land. They were really quite happy during the Ottoman period. It was kind of chill, kind of quiet, and not many waves were being made against the local communities. They were small anyway. There was not much development anyway. Ottoman Empire was basically bankrupt anyway for about 150 years. So it was kind of a weak period. But when they saw that Jews were beginning to return with the rise of Zionism in the, let's call it, mid-19th century, the reaction of the Holy See was really quite, they were afraid, they were fearful, they didn't want to necessarily have Jews controlling Christian holy sites. And it's kind of for obvious reasons. If you look at anti-Semitism, the shift that occurred, let's say, pre-19th century, so it was because Jews were Christ killers. Post-19th century, post-emancipation, so you could say it's economic issues and the status of the Jew and all these different things that we see today. So a lot of it was based on the fearful of Jewish presences. They were afraid of any type of backlash that might occur against them. Also, interestingly, you might find this interesting, just for example, when we compare it to, for example, the approach of the Holy See to the Third Reich, to Nazi Germany, as opposed to the Bolshevik influence, for example, during the Cold War. And that is that, as you might know, Zionism was a strong Bolshevik socialist type of movement. And as a result, and as you can well imagine, in the Bolshevik context, religion is really not important. In fact, you look at any of Karl Marx's writings, for example, on religion. And they were, the Holy See in particular, and the Vatican in particular, they're very fearful of the Bolshevik influence because their feeling was as well, they don't agree with religion at all. And in fact, if you look at the early Zionist movement, hardcore Zionism. We're not talking about religious Zionism and other incantations that occurred thereafter, but it was extremely socialist and extremely I wouldn't say anti-religious, but it kind of was. But certainly non-religious, secular for sure. And that's certainly, Herzl's dream, secular state, modern state type stuff, as well as coexistence. So you have this pre-state Israel, the approach towards Israel at the very least, and in the area was that they were actually quite against the formation of the State of Israel. Post-World War II, a strong U.S. influence on the Vatican to support the Jewish state, a strong influence by the United States, heavy pressure placed on the Vatican to support the formation of the Jewish state. And as a result, the Vatican kind of, let's call it it didn't jump on the bandwagon initially, but it's certainly from 1950 onward, a strong focus on protecting the holy sites and what's called the corpus separatum. Corpus separatum, corpus body, separatum separate body, i.e. the initial plan from 1948, I believe, from Belgium and a bunch of other states, and that is to separate, and actually even beforehand, you could even argue from the Peel plan. So you're really talking like late 30s. But you're looking at the corpus separatum. The idea was to separate Jerusalem and Bethlehem into kind of an international protectorate of some sort. And then they had a little strip connecting Jerusalem to the sea. I always liked that one, in case they have to run. Hey, we'll make sure we can get to the ships and get out of here, just in case. So they have a little strip connecting them to the sea. But the truth is that this idea of corpus separatum was very appealing to the Vatican. They really liked it. Because, of course, it would allow for, obviously, international protection for important holy sites. Bethlehem and Jerusalem are where the key Christian holy sites are located. And the notion is that nobody then would control Jerusalem, but it would be internationalized of some sort. This plan was, the corpus separatum was kind of abandoned easily by the early 1950s, and it's kind of the fault of the states themselves, not even of Israel or the Palestinians. But it's actually nobody could agree on who would make up the board, and they were all infighting, and France was fighting with other states, and I want to be control. There was all these different types of, as you come on, like Christian community, particularly Christian European states. They were fighting over who should really control the corpus separatum. So it kind of fell by the wayside. But I will say is that the Vatican still maintains, today not so clear, but I would argue probably, but certainly till about 10 years ago, had very strong visions of having some type of corpus separatum put into play. So it is still kind of important to them. Again, it demonstrates the difference for the Holy Land. Post-1967, so of course 67, Six-Day War, and all the disputed territories, occupied territories, Judea, Samaria, West Bank, fill in the blanks, however you want to designate it, happens. So there's a key shift by the Vatican in particular, and that is the focus on the Palestinian Christians, plight of the people. I should add is that that was also post 1948, because many of the refugees, or at least the individuals who ran, were actually Christians. Not all, and not the majority, but many. So you have a focus on the Palestinian Christians, the plight of the people type of notion. Human rights, self-determination, protection of individuals in need, all those humanistic things that we saw in the previous slide that I was talking about, theological commitments type things that we could think about. So they would come into play here with regard to the focus on the Palestinian Christians, plight of the people in the post-1967 context, as well as the impact in other Arab countries for Christians, for Catholics. Meaning, if the Vatican comes across, or the Holy See comes across as overly favorable, if you will, towards Israel, there's going to be a backlash, certainly in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, if you just think about the Arab oil embargo. There's going to be a backlash against Christian communities, Catholic communities in particular, if the Vatican would overstep its bounds and embrace Israel, if you will. And finally, and this is again why I assert that it might be different for the Holy Land, I actually think it is, and that is a focus on maintaining a focus on holy sites, the key holy sites, which we'll talk about in a second, but certainly allowing for some type of protection to be accorded towards these particular holy sites. Whether it be the Israelis, whether it be the Palestinians, whether it be some corpus separatum, some international body, the Vatican wants to make sure that those holy sites are going to be protected. And I might add in parentheses, and that they have a hand in allowing for that protection, or controlling these holy sites in some way or manner, which is a different lecture entirely, but it's something to be aware of. And so I wrote down here is altering IR, international relations perceptions, maybe, but it is something to think about when we go through this particular lecture. And you could see how, of course, for obvious reasons, while the Holy Land is really key to the Holy See. That's obvious. Now, I have on here agreements and recognition, and the truth is, if you look at the 1993 agreement with the Holy See, between Israel and the Holy See and the Vatican, and you look at the 2000 shorter, what's called a basic agreement between what was then Palestinian Liberation Organization (PLO) and the Holy See, and then the May 2015 agreement between the Holy See and the Palestinian Authority, the PA. So recognition plays a major part in all three of them. Certainly in the 1993 one with Israel, and the May 2015 one with the Vatican, with the Palestinian Authority. And that is, and I should say, is as a result of recognition, and the Holy See wisely recognizing, forgive the pun, but wisely recognizing that recognition was really important to these parties who it was dealing with. So it made a lot of opportunistic moves to try to sort of curry favor and sort of squeeze out of these agreements as many protections as they could, in order to allow better life, if you will, or better protections for the Christian community, Catholic community in the Holy Land itself. So they were kind of opportunistic, actually. To give them credit about that. In fact, just to tell you something really funny, they were extremely opportunistic in the sense that the representative of the Holy See who was engaged in negotiations with Israel in 1993, his name was David Yeager, is actually a Jewish guy from Israel. He's Israeli. But the Israelis didn't know that. And he converted to Christianity. A really smart guy. He became an expert in canon law, rose up in the ranks in the Vatican itself. Actually, at one stage, he was going to be a bishop, but I don't think they wanted to make him a bishop because of his Jewish and Israeli origins, to be quite frank. So they kind of stopped him at a certain level. He's really high up in the Canon Law Institute there in Rome. But he was negotiating for the Holy See with the Israelis. And the Israelis were talking Hebrew at the table, and he was listening in. They didn't know that this guy was he's an Israeli. He was listening to everything they were saying. And eventually he went up to them and says, look, I know what you're saying. I understand everything you're saying. I'm Israeli. In fact, he goes back to Israel to vote in the elections every time they have elections. The whole thing's hilarious. He's a really interesting guy, but they're very opportunistic, and I mean that in a positive way. That, of course, you want to take the advantage for yourself. So. Now, of course, recognition is important, obviously, for the Palestinians, the idea of statehood, the idea of self-determination. That goes without saying. We could see that. The Palestinians, almost the focus and the intense focus of their entire international relations is on recognition, achieving some form of legitimacy in the eyes of the world through recognition of them as a state. And that's for obvious reasons, as we can think about. But recognition also for Israel was, if you look at the 93 agreement, there's about 3 or 4 paragraphs that deal with recognition of Israel as representing the Jewish people, designating, it's almost the first time post-Nostra Aetat from 1964, where you have the Holy See recognizing the Jews as a people. These are important statements that are being made here. And it was really central to the Israelis that this language was put in. The Israelis kind of looked at the 1993 agreement as not just an agreement with another entity, state-like entity, but also historical reparation, if you will. Rectification, let's call it that. And it was a very important move for the Israelis to have the Vatican, to have the Holy See, actually call, this is the state of the Jewish people. That was a big step for them. And obviously for the Palestinian side, of course, the notion of self-determination, they want to stay. So the achieving recognition, formal recognition, what happened in May 2015 between the Palestinian Authority and the Holy See was really quite important, was really quite significant. Obviously for the Palestinians, and as we see, that's part of the snowball that's happening with regard to the Palestinian Authority, kind of acquiring recognition from different states as it goes along. I believe it's up to probably about 120 some odd, if I'm not mistaken, which is really quite a lot. For the Holy See, however, recognition was and still is a secondary issue. And in fact, I think that they were somewhat, when I speak to some of the Holy See people, or at least those who are familiar with them, or individuals, the nuncios and individuals who represent them, not that they laugh, but they don't see the importance of recognition. Recognition is kind of a seminal concept in public international law. It's not that important, but it is indicative of your status. It is indicative of your legitimacy. For the Holy See, that's not really an issue. It's a temporal matter. They don't really care too much about that. And therefore, recognition is not going to be a major drive for them. And they're willing to, oh yeah, sure, we'll recognize you. It's not a problem. As long as it's within the realm of their international relations, of protecting Catholic communities and humanistic impulses and things like that. But their specific interest for the Holy See, particularly in the Holy Land, is of course, our holy places, protection of the key holy places, the key status quo places, which again I do promise I'll mention in a second, but I just want to build it up, as it were. But of course, holy places, and I'm not just talking about places like the key status quo places like Holy Sepulchre and Church of Nativity, but also even the cenacle on Mount Zion, where the Last Supper took place, for example, which, by the way, subsequently became a mosque, and now is kind of unclear what it is, but it's certainly a place revered by Catholics, no doubt, and still used as a place of worship. And there are other issues going on there between Jews and Catholics as well, which maybe if we have time we could talk about. Freedom of religion, of course, is obviously an issue. And that's a central issue, specific interest and a central issue for the Holy See in any form of negotiation, but particularly in the Holy Land, because pilgrimage, the allowance of visiting these places, they want to be sure they have access. They want to be sure that they can go to these holy places. It's not just a matter of them being there. And as you know, pilgrimage is arguably, it's not clear if it's a manifestation of religion or not, but it's arguably an important part of your practice. It's not like, I would assert, and this might be wrong, but I would assert under canon law, that it's not on the same level as, for example, a Muslim going to the Hajj, right? That you're required under Islam to go at least once in your lifetime to Mecca, Medina. And the Hajj, of course, the implication of the Hajj is that it's during Ramadan. You could go also not during the Hajj. It's probably not as high level. I forgot the term of it, Ijibah or something. Forgive me for not remembering the Islamic name. So I apologize for that. But the point of it is that freedom of religion for the Holy See, the Vatican, is extremely central. And church standing, and that's also extremely important. Financial and legal. What I mean by that is legal personality, which is saying is that we recognize is a bad term, but we provide you with a legal standing that this church has capacities. It's not just a matter of recognition in international law, which is kind of verbiage, but it's more of that you actually have legal capacity in that state. It's recognizing and allowing for them to have some type of legal basis. And financial, which I'll talk about just really briefly with regard to the Israelis, but financial is, of course, what everybody wants. And that's tax exemption. Oh yeah, we'd all like to get that. Well, with this financial thing, it's interesting is that with Israel, and this is a good contrast to the May 2015 agreement, in the 1993 agreement, it actually says is that within 6 months after we sign this agreement, and this is from 1993, will enter into a legal personality agreement with Israel, between Israel and the Holy See, and a financial agreement between Israel and the Holy See. Well, the legal personality agreement took until 1997, and the financial agreement is still being negotiated with the Holy See. And it's partially because of that great tax-exempt status, because everybody wants that. So you can well imagine, and I don't even have to lay this out for you, but if Netanyahu or the present government or any government in Israel is going to, and they do have tax-exempt status anyway, but they want an official, is going to sign an official document providing tax-exempt status to churches and institutions in the Holy Land, in Israel, or wherever it might be that Israel controls, I guarantee you that the government will fall, because you'll have all these religious and ultra-Orthodox parties saying, "Oh, I want tax-exempt status as well. What are you signing this agreement for?" That's part of the problem that Israel has right now. And it's causing major problems with regard to the relations that exist between the Holy See and Israel, because Israel is seriously dragging their feet. They basically have an agreement in play. I think it's even online somewhere. If you go to some old Haaretz archive from like a year or two ago, you could find it. At least, some of the, obviously not the exact agreement, that's not released, but at least the contours of the agreement itself. So these are important issues with regard to the specific interests of the Holy See. And the reason why I say it's nice to contrast is because if you look at the 1993 agreement, which is about maybe about 4 or 5 pages, nice paragraphs, and like I mentioned, they refer to the Holy See, to the legal and financial status. If you jump over to the May 2015 agreement, well, there the Holy See said, this time we're going to make sure that we're putting it in the agreement about legal standing, and they have about 2 pages on that, and financial agreement, and they have about 4 pages on that one. So they really took care of their interest, if you will, as well as that we'll talk about freedom of religion in holy places now as well. But I want you to be aware of the specific interests that exist when they're engaging in these type of negotiations. Just really briefly, with the 2000, what's called the Basic Agreement, that took out the word basic, and then it was with the Palestinian Liberation Organization, because they were still acting as their international reps for the Palestinians. So there's a preamble about the status of PLO and the right of self-determination, but very, very cagey language. No notion of recognition. Back in 2000, the Holy See was extremely careful, what kind of walking with really on eggshells with regard to what kind of to what extent it would allow for some form of recognition to the Palestinians in that sense. Yes, of course, the notion of self-determination. This basically just, what they did is they reflected kind of language from the Security Council resolutions, which is pretty easy. Whatever Security Council resolution said, a notion of self-determination for Palestinians. And yes, I know that actually, if you look at the Security Council resolutions, again, another lecture, but they don't really talk about self-determination. There's only been 1 or 2 times that they do. But basically, the Holy See was kind of following what other states had done till then and desired not to step in the shoes of Israel. They also have, and this is what's interesting in the 2000 agreement, is a reference to an internationalized Jerusalem. And you can well imagine that's going to change in the May 2015 agreement, because both Israel and Palestine, and the Palestinians, Israelis and Palestinians, are calling for the capital to be Jerusalem, right, which is kind of part of the problem as well. So you have a reference here in this 2000 agreement to an internationalized Jerusalem. Again, it kind of mirrors the opportunistic moves by the Holy See that they're going to try to grab, and rightfully so, it's realpolitik on a certain level. They're going to grab as much as they can, and here what they're grabbing is they're holding on or clinging on to the idea of the corpus separatum. Let's internationalize this place. And they knew back in 2000 that the PA, the Palestinians, PLO in particular, they didn't have that much leverage as such. So they kind of could squeeze what they wanted. The articles themselves, again, it's a really short basic agreement. It's maybe a page or 2. It's basically human rights obligations to be accorded to the Catholics, capacity of the Holy See, legal capacity, equality, non-discrimination, very nice kind of generalized concepts, mentioning the status quo sites and church functions, and then the non-prejudicial aspect of the agreement, i.e., we don't want to breach, the Holy See says, Article 11 of the agreement with Israel. So they're going to be careful to what extent to any extent that this particular agreement is going to be entered into, they're going to be careful that it's not going to breach other agreements. Well, this language is kind of going to change as we go to the 2015 agreement. And let's take a look at some of that language. This May 2015 agreement with the Palestinians, preamble, they recognize an independent, sovereign, democratic, and viable state of Palestine. Now that's really nice language. It's heavy-duty language. That is formal recognition. formally recognizing the state of Palestine. This language was not used in the previous agreements. It was either the PLO, individuals representing Palestinians, stuff like that. So here right away you have in May 2015 is a formal recognition. I should add is that the Vatican, the Holy See, had already recognized the State of Palestine, by the way, about a year and a half before, but this is formal recognition, stated in the document itself. It accords it more, again, as I said, more currency, if you will. But look what it says. On the basis of the pre-1967 borders. Whoa. I don't know if I'm sure the Palestinians read this, but I don't know. I mean, if I'm an Israeli, I'm sure that my foreign ministry is looking at it and saying, oh, wow, look at that. Palestinians are ready to negotiate from pre-1967 borders. That's pretty heavy, if you ask me. And that's kind of, that's what I call down here is the note, the border designation. That's a really major move. I can almost guarantee you that the majority of the Palestinians living under PA control are not aware that their PA has signed an agreement that says that we're going to negotiate from 1967 borders. Almost guarantee you that, because they'd either be killed or be ousted. So it's something to consider, and I think a rather significant language if you look at this 2015 agreement. Notice also, of course, including East Jerusalem and the Gaza Strip. So right away, you're saying is that the State of Palestine will be on the basis of pre-67, including East Jerusalem. So it's kind of abandoning that idea of internationalization of Jerusalem and kind of saying to the Palestinians, oh yeah, we recognize that you're going to be in East Jerusalem because it is pre-67 borders, and that will be your capital, which is, kind of that is what the Palestinians desire, at least, for today. So the idea is that you have this really, I think, really interesting language of pre-67 and East Jerusalem, and this is what irked the Israelis with regard to that reference to East Jerusalem. That really bothered the Israelis in a big way. What are you doing? You're recognizing, you're allowing for, you're getting in the way of the negotiations, temporal conflict, all those different things that they're talking about. Because right away they're dealing with disputed areas, which is what they promised the Holy See promised not to do in the 1993 agreement. Both sides also reaffirmed support for a two-state solution, which I think is also significant, important. But it's something to be aware of. And let's take a look at some of the language as well. And I better hurry up. I'm taking my time. I'm sorry. It's so nice to talk to you guys. You're all like paying attention. I'm not used to that, So it's really good. I mean, I see you guys are alert. I really like that. So forgive me if I'm taking my time. I'm just really enjoying it. So forgive me. But I'll try to get through some of these slides because I really want you to be aware of some things. One is that what's really interesting is a trade-off for this recognition of the State of Palestine was extremely broad language with regard to freedom of religion. Beyond what the human right, you're not going to believe me, but as Professor Nakai said, yes, I did write a thesis on freedom of religion and conscience and stuff like that. So I kind of know a little bit about this stuff. Not everything, trust me. But the language that's used in this particular document with regard to what freedom of religion or the human right to freedom of religion actually is way beyond what the understanding of freedom of religion is in the human rights context. And it was kind of, again, it was an opportunistic move, again, really smart, in saying to the Palestinians, okay, you guys want recognition? Yeah, we'll give you recognition. No problem. But this is what we want. This is our checklist. And it's really funny because if you look at this May 2015 agreement, it's really quite long, shockingly long, actually. And for a guy who has to read it and then analyze each particular article, it's like, it's really long. No, I'm just kidding. But but it's great actually. But the trade-off is unbelievable because basically what the Palestinians are getting here is recognition of the State of Palestine, putting aside 67 borders and yes, East Jerusalem. And then everything else is for the church. The rest of the articles, the rest of the 15 some odd pages are for the church. It's really wild. The broad language for the Palestinian Authority referencing the 2000 agreement, international human rights standards and beyond, that's what I'm talking about here. And basically it's kind of binding the PLO to really broad and stringent human rights standards with regard to, at the very least, the Catholic community for those who are under control of the Palestinian Authority. I do want to say one thing that you might find interesting, and this is, I have to stress, this is not by my interpretation, this is what I've read by writings of individuals from the Holy See, including, for example, David Yeager, who I mentioned to you beforehand, who is really one of the most eminent, senior canon law authorities in the Vatican. Their perception of the freedom of religion is really probably very different. Probably, I don't know, by most of us in this room. And that is, they perceive the human right to freedom of religion as grounds for what I call here spreading the truth, notice the capital T, because it's their truth. And their perception of freedom of religion, I mean the Holy See's, Vatican's perception of freedom of religion is that it provides grounds by which they can operate to spread the truth about the words of Jesus Christ and the gospel and all these different things. It's not in the way we would understand freedom of religion and the way it's kind of understood in international human rights, and that is that everybody has freedom of religion and you can make your own choice. They don't look at it that way. That's not what freedom of religion is for the Holy See. That's really important to take into account. And that's why they kind of, when they go drafting up these articles regarding freedom of religion and the rights that the Catholic community has, under the agreement, they provide extremely broad language. Language of also, interestingly enough, of maintaining beliefs, not necessarily manifesting beliefs. Meaning, if you compare the International Covenant on Civil Political Rights, one of the seminal documents in human rights from 1966, the language that's used there is when you come to bring forth your religion, because of course you can believe anything you want in your head, right? You can believe in the spaghetti monster god or whatever it is that they have now. But when it comes to manifesting your religion, then you're meant to only manifest what is mandated by your religion. So, for example, if you observe Sabbath, so your Sabbath, if you're as a Jew, so it might be that you manifest your religion by not working on the Sabbath. Right? But does that mean that you then have a right of going up to pray in the Temple Mount? Well, the question is that a manifestation of your religion? Is there any requirement in Judaism to go pray in the Temple Mount? I know I'm opening up a huge can of worms here, but the answer is not really, unless you're going to conduct some type of sacrifice, or maybe over Passover, which you probably can do today without whatever, not going into too many Jewish law rules. But the point of it is that manifestation, not that it's meant to limit religion, but it's meant to hone in a little bit, or rein in, I should say, a little bit, the capacity of an individual to practice their religion. It's manifestation of. The words used in the particular May 2015 agreement, with regard to freedom of religion is to maintain beliefs. That's really much broader. And that kind of led to all these different things like pilgrimage, like proselytizing. So here you have right to worship includes the right to profess his or her religion. And I have down here about proselytizing. Proselytizing, as you know, you might not know, but it is. I know for Americans it's a bit different because you have freedom of speech, and it's such a powerful notion here that it's not an issue about proselytizing. But if you go into Europe, proselytizing is a real problem. And certainly in Israel, and certainly I can tell you right now in the Palestinian Authority, the capacity to proselytize is really quite difficult. Israelis in particular, if you look at compare an interest in favoring Christian pilgrimage, they kind of don't even deal with proselytizing. The word's not even mentioned in the 1993 agreement. They kind of say, yeah, everybody has the right of freedom of expression. In fact, if you've ever been to Jerusalem and you go to the LDS, the Church of Latter-day Saints, the Mormons, they have a beautiful center there. I think it costs like $25-30 million. Part of the agreement was they actually passed a law in Israel. A law, like going to the Congress. They went to the Parliament. They said, yeah, well, we'll let you build this here, but you have to promise you're not going to proselytize. To that extent, the Israelis are worried about these type of issues. And they were very careful in the 1993 agreement. And in fact, it's another issue. Financial agreement, and the other issue is issuing visas to church personnel because Israel is extremely worried about individuals coming in to proselytize. Here, in this particular agreement, the proselytizing was not even an issue. Yeah, you can profess beliefs, publish, and disseminate materials. The language there was extremely broad. It gives the Catholic Church almost carte blanche to do what they want, and certainly to proselytize. Really broad language. And I can tell you right now, they place proselytism and pilgrimage under the guise of freedom of religion. But I can tell you right now that is not how the human right to freedom of religion is interpreted. And that's not a bad thing. I'm just telling you is how they broaden the notion of what freedom of religion means. If proselytizing is part of how you manifest, that's another story entirely, and it's something to think about. For example, the famous Kokonakis case with regard in Greece with regard to a Jehovah's Witness who wanted to proselytize, and under Greek law it's disallowed, and the European court said, no, you have to allow for that to happen. It's part of the manifestation of their religion. All right? And there's some cases yes, some cases no. But the general idea is that proselytizing is only if it's a form of manifestation, and it's unclear under the canon law whether proselytizing as a form of manifestation. But if you look at the languages professing his or her religion, it includes beliefs, published, disseminating materials, saying anything you want on the pulpit as well is protected, stuff like that. They also have pilgrimage as a right, as an extension of the right to freedom of religion, meaning the capacity to engage in pilgrimage is perceived as included in the right of freedom of religion. And again, an interest in favoring Christian pilgrimage in the Israel Agreement is this kind of loosey-goosey language of, we'll let you know. It's not automatic. Here, it's an automatic right. I'll go through this really quickly at this slide, and then I'll probably jump to the post-2015, if you guys don't mind, because we're running out of time and I don't want to keep you here too long. But just to be aware, property in holy places, obviously, again, are the other issue that I was mentioning to you guys as central, as seminal to the Holy See. And control over land sales, interestingly, that occurs as well in the Israel 1993 agreement, and that is basically any form of land sale that's owned by held by the church has to be approved by the Pope, actually. Has to go back to the Vatican and you have to give their little gushpanka, their little sale, their little seal of approval, so to speak. The focus on the status quo is interesting here, and I want to compare that to the Israeli agreement because these are key. These are the status quo sites. Status quo sites, again, I don't want to lecture too much on this because that could really be a whole lecture in itself, but basically emanates from a decree by the Sultan of Constantinople when the Ottoman Empire was existing, that there would be certain sites which will inherently be worthy of protection, and it's an extremely old order, if you will, or system of protection, meaning over 200, maybe even 300 years old. I've seen references even to the 14th century, beginning of the Ottoman Empire, but it's certainly documents from the 19th century, easy, early 19th. And then instantiated, mentioned again and again, over and over. And then eventually mentioned in international treaties like Treaty of Berlin, the different congresses that occurred in the latter part of the 19th, early part of the 20th century. So the status quo and the notion of protected status quo sites is really quite profound, really quite strong. And here, of course, Holy Sepulchre and the Basilica, which is in the Old City, Church of Nativity, which is in Bethlehem, Virgin's Tomb, which is in the Mount of Olives, and Church of Ascension as well. So these are key sites focus on, and what's interesting is, in this particular May 2015 agreement, is that the church is the only party with an interest, at least as perceived in the May 2015 agreement, in these holy sites. Which, again, I'm sure that they took an opportunistic move on the Palestinians, because when the Israelis came to this, they said, no, we're not going to have you as the only party. There's also the Greek Orthodox, there's also the Armenian Church, there's also the Copts, and there's a bunch of other other smaller sects that also have an important role, and actually not only important role, they do have a role, an active role to play in taking care of these holy sites. How can we put down that the Catholic Church is the only one to have a role in these holy sites? So the language used in the Israel agreement is Christian communities, to be more inclusive and to sort of protect themselves, the Israelis, diplomatically. And what's really wild to see the language here is that the church is only, and the church only has an interest in. Go ahead. Yeah, I'll be 2 seconds, but go ahead. Why not?
Well, they didn't include Gethsemane or no comment about Nazareth.
Yeah, sorry. Yes, that's correct. So this is interesting. They didn't include the cenacle, for example. I mentioned the cenacle on purpose because, yeah, you're right. Not going to my holy places lecture because that's another one. But basically, really, really briefly, status quo are these sites, and I could explain why that happened. But basically, because the Ottoman Empire had a control, and it was warfare. Crimean War arguably was because the Holy Sepulchre had a hole in its roof. I know that sounds ludicrous, but it's kind of true. There are other extremely important sites that I'm going to call holy places, capital H, capital P, that are called. That's how they're designated. They actually reference them in the agreement too. I don't want to go into it too much. So, for example, Senegal, Mount of Mount? I always get the Mount Ararat mixed up with Mount Hartibol. Mount Timor, I think it's called, if I'm not mistaken. Forgive me for not knowing where Jesus ascended. Yeah, it's up in the Galilee. Tabor, yeah, thank you. I know it's Timor, Tabor, yeah, thank you. T-A-B-O-R, yeah, thanks. So you have, these important holy, so those are holy places, HP, that they merit higher protection than, let's say, a church or some guy built down the road, but they're not on the same level as these status quo sites for a whole bunch of different reasons. Partially also because of practice, what's done at these places. So, okay, but that's a good question, a fair question. So all right. Let me just skip over because I'm going to take another just 3-4 minutes. Oh yes, statements that came out just to give us an overall picture here. So the Holy See, of course, is a recognition of the Palestinian Authority. The language uses as an observer state in the United Nations, but the language is State of Palestine. And the key was for them better services and protections to the Christians in the area. Palestinian Authority, their statements were, well, we're upholding commitment to freedom and to tolerance and to, a minority within our land. And, of course, we're upholding the church's standing and its capacity. And Israel's reaction was, as you can well imagine, it regrets the recognition, being that it hinders peace negotiations. That's kind of still, I guess maybe, I don't know if it'll happen all the way through the Obama period, but that is the State Department, United States State Department notion that why U.S., for example, has not recognized is because State of Palestine is because their claim is that it will hinder peace negotiations. So Israel kind of takes that line as well for obvious reasons, and these were kind of the reactions that occurred. Israel kind of like just saying, we really regret this bad move, guys. And the Holy See is saying as well, we're recognizing and we're making sure that we have better protection. And the PA kind of being happy with what they got and saying as well, we're committing to freedom and tolerance. And I could go to result or questions to consider. I'm not sure which one, but I'll go to results because it might be just to answer and sort of, sew up this whole thing, and then I'll take questions, I promise. Let me just get to this one. All right, I appreciate the patience of this. Sorry. 2015 agreement, yes, the 2015 agreement reflects Holy See policy with regard to acting on behalf of Christian laity, with regard to allowing for protections to be accorded and trying to get as much as they can. Yes, there might have been some possible political influence here and maybe an Article 11 issue. I wrote needs examination. I'm not entirely sure. Did they really get involved in a temporal conflict, or was it just a, kind of a fait accompli that you're going to recognize the State of Palestine? They didn't have that much of an influence. In fact, interestingly enough, and then I promise I'll get to the question, interestingly enough, after they signed the agreement in May 2015, and I find this kind of like a test case, it was kind of interesting, I believe it was end of June, beginning of July of 2015, so the Palestinians wanted to have their flag displayed on the outside plaza of the United Nations in New York, like every other member state's flags are displayed, and they're really not allowed, if you're not allowed, it's a bad term, but they're not meant to do so because of the rules of procedure that if you're an observer state, you don't have the right of putting up your flag. And they actually went to the Vatican and said, hey, come on, you recognized us in this May 2015 agreement, help us get our flag up. And the Vatican kind of said, no, this is what we're doing. We agreed to this, and we don't have our flag up, we're observer state as well, and let's leave well enough alone for now. So it's just kind of a little contrast and interesting idea to show is that arguably maybe they were worried, not worried, or at least have in the back of their mind that they don't want to get involved in these temporal rivalries, the Vatican, the Holy See, and therefore they held back as well and said, no, we don't want to get involved in these type of issues. We're recognizing you as a state, and that's, that should be must speak, as they say in Hebrew. That's enough for now, so to speak. So.